Welcome to the channel. Thank you everyone for tuning in. On today's video, we are looking at a watch from Mysterious Code, the first of this brand on my channel. Now this was sent in by the Enyarda store, the same store that bought a Sieg Flammer, and I unboxed this watch a couple of weeks ago. Now what makes this watch very interesting is that it arrived just after the IXDAO. It's homaging the IWC engineer, and after spending some time with it after the unboxing, I can tell you that this is probably the best built watch for £75 or just under. Now, I can't think of anything that is better, not from Pagani, not from Cadison, or Steel Dive, or Addis Dive. Now, throughout this video, as I review this Mysterious Code, what I will do is mention where the IXDAO differs and offer some close-ups in comparison as we go along. Now, there are quite a few differences, but it isn't as vast as the price point may suggest in relation to both. So let's make a start. So the specs will be on screen for you guys, and the only difference here on the face of it is the VH31 hybrid quartz movement in this watch as compared to the automatic in the IXDAO. You get better overall accuracy with the Seiko VH31. It's a pick up and go, and also comes without a date to match the dateless design on the dial. Now, I actually figured this watch would be thinner and lighter than the IXDAO due to the quartz movement. However, there isn't actually much difference. The weight between the two is very close, and so is the thickness, which is of course down to the similar case design. The IXDAO is actually a little shorter on the lug to lug, which is why it wore so well. Now, it's also worth mentioning that the end links on this particular watch also tuck under the case, as it did with the IXDAO, which is quite impressive and an indicator to just how good this budget version is. So with this Mysterious Code, you get a few dial colors available, a total of 8. I went with the grey version, and it's okay in terms of color, a little dark, so you may want something a little more vibrant or lighter. But in terms of quality, it is very high for the price. You still have that press pattern, which is very detailed and still quite dynamic due to the raised pattern. But in comparison to the IXDAO, we find the IXDAO is a little better with increased depth of the press pattern and larger patterns which add a lot more definition. On this Mysterious Code, you still have nicely applied polished 3D hour markers resting on top of the minute track with a defined concentric lines. Everything is done nicely, but I don't think the hour markers have that beveled edge like the IXDAO did. But I felt on the IXDAO they were a little too thin and will largely go unnoticed. The handset is polished with a chamfer, so you get a good reflection from the light, but they do have good visibility. Overall, there's a lot of fine details which is done quite well. The lume is also very surprising, as it is quite good for such a cheaper watch. You've got solid C3, no patchiness, and you also got great visibility considering those very thin hour markers. Now let's look at the negatives. Right, the first being that annoying logo at 12. The text is just way too small and the name is way too long. It literally just looks like a scribble across the top, and it may be the biggest put off on the dial. Now there's also another issue which may be a deal breaker for some. The dial and the bezel is actually misaligned. When we check it against the 12 o'clock screw on the bezel, you can clearly see it is off center, and I think this may be the screw which is off center and not the dial. It's extremely annoying to see, and it does spoil it quite a lot. So let's move on to the case. It is extremely well made. Definitely the best I've seen for such a low price. It's fully brushed with soft brushing with visible grain on the A face, showing linear brushing. You have horizontal brushing on the sides and circular brushing on the A face of the flat bezel. It still has a large polished bevel, smooth brushing on the A face, and the only thing it lacks is that slim polished ring around the crystal which was present on the IXDAO. Now there's also a difference on the case. The Mysterious Code has a straight edge along the bottom just above the end link, whereas the IXDAO has a very smooth curve. Now you also have brushed bevel edges along the side of the case, as opposed to the polished edges on the IXDAO. Now you're also missing that bit of polishing that we saw on the crown guards on the IXDAO, but the crown guard edges on this watch are still quite smooth. Now I think this is quite a subjective point, because I think a lot of people would still like this, as it does minimize the visibility of scratches and it does tone down the watch a little. Now, on this case, there is one thing that the Mysterious Code does a little better than the IXDAO. The underside of the case has been slightly beveled to make it very smooth, which on the IXDAO, as I pointed out, was missed, giving it a much sharp case finish. Now, function-wise, the crown does have some really nice machining. The splines give you a good grip, and due to the movement you get zero resistance, so it's very easy to use in comparison to the torquey automatic PT5000 we saw on the IXDAO. There's also a slight size difference. The Mysterious Code uses a 5.8mm crown and the IXDAO uses a 5.3mm crown, which makes a big difference. Now when we move over to the bracelet, instantly this is where we see the price difference. The bracelet is not as substantial as it is on the IXDAO. It's also a little lighter in hand. There's a lot more movement. That's because the watch bracelet does use split pins in comparison to the screw-in pins for the IXDAO. The finishing is also on a budget. But having said that, it is still very nice finishing. The brushing is of quite a nice standard. It is pretty even. There's no glaring errors, but you can see clearly in hand it's not as refined as it was on the IXDAO. And the difference on the links is also visible with the lack of polished bevel edges, which gave the IXDAO that visual appeal. But of course, this is expected for this. Remember, it's only £75 versus that £230 on the IXDAO. Now the clasp is also weaker. It's still a butterfly clasp, but it's not sturdy like it was on the IXDAO. The links, as I mentioned earlier, still tucking under the case, so it still helps it wear quite nice on wrist. There's no sharp edges, you do have a balanced weight distribution, and there's no hair pulling. Now you don't get any half links, so you've got the same concerns present as were on the IXDAO regarding the wrist sizing, but for my 6.5 inch wrist I managed to size it just fine. I had to remove 3 links from either side. Now I found the IXDAO does wear slightly better due to that very slight shorter lug to lug, but which makes it sit a lot better on wrist. Also it looks nicer on wrist with the added polish highlights, but for just a fraction of the price, this mysterious code does an incredible job of giving you plenty of quality and build. I'm hoping the misalignment is actually a one-off, but if it isn't, then I'm not sure many people will be going for it, knowing that this is a permanent issue. Now, to add a point on this, it is ridiculous how year on year brands on AliExpress bring out even better quality finishing with premium specifications, and specifically with these comparisons, it shows how little difference there is between brands with a higher price difference between them. It does kind of skew our expectations a lot when we look at non-AliExpress brands, which I'm not sure if it's a good thing or a bad thing, because there's valid arguments from both sides. So it's very interesting, of course, and as a consumer from AliExpress, it just makes our life much better as we're getting way better built watches for a much cheaper price. So that's it from me today. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and I will see you on the next video. Thank you all for watching.